Hello, thank you. And let me share my screen. Okay, so it's a pleasure to meet everybody. I know that many of you may have been on some of the earlier talks from my colleagues at the NIH Office of Small Business Research. And by the way, Michal, can you just let me know that you could hear me and see my slides? So I'll be kind of going through the overall NIH program very quickly because that was covered in previous talks that you may have attended. And then I'll focus on the National Institute on Aging for really the bulk of our session. And feel free to enter any questions in the chat, and I'd be happy to get to them as we go. So again, I'll go through these quickly. SBIR, STTR total for this coming year, FY21, will be about over $1.2 billion, and the NIA will actually be about $130 million. These are congressional set-aside programs that require agencies that provide money to universities provide a percentage of those funds to small businesses in a way that meets the mission of the agency. So at the NIH, as you may know, we're made up of 27 institutes and centers. The NIA now being the third largest in terms of budget of those institutes and centers. This shows you the growth in the NIA over the last 7 or so years. Again, in 2021, we estimate about $130 million. And then again, that's specific to small businesses through in seed funding through these programs. So it's the largest seed fund available, and especially as you think about aging and Alzheimer's disease. And the growth in NIH's budget is unprecedented in the government and at NIH, but it's really due to the congressional increase in funding for Alzheimer's disease in large part. So lots of benefits to SBIR, as I'm sure you know. It's not a loan, it's fully non-dilutive, and there's no repayment required. It also helps with validation and verification. A lot of investors, especially if you talk to angel investors, you know, they really do like to see that something has already been vetted by NIH. Eligibility is set by the SBA. You have to be a small business in the United States per their definitions. I often say SBIR, yet I really mean SBIR or STTR. We manage both within that $130 million. SBIR, the much larger of the two programs. In both cases, the applicant is the small business. In STTR, however, you are required to have a research institution partner. You can have that in SBIR, but you're required to have that in STTR. And more of the work is often done at the academic institution in STTR, whereas in SBIR, most of the work has to be done by the small business. So the program is structured in phases, and I'll go through the phases here very quickly. Phase 1, that's where you really develop proof of concept. At NIA, now the funding limits are tricky, and for those of you that have heard other talks, you might be having other numbers in mind. There are guidelines set by terms of NIH, then Congress set caps on top of those guidelines, which have some relevance, but in reality at NIA, most of the topics that we deal with are actually covered by waivers to go above those caps. So in essence, the real budget limit that you need to worry about is what's stated in the FOA in terms of the total budget for those covered by a waiver, assuming your topic is, and you should definitely check the waiver topics, but in all likelihood, if you're doing something relevant to NIA, it would be. So for phase 1 at NIA, in terms of the omnibus funding opportunities, we allow up to $300,000. For AD, ADRD, we have a solicitation, Alzheimer's disease and related dementias, up to $500,000. For phase 2, that's more development focused, usually preclinical, but not always, awards up to $2 million and 2.5 for AD and ADRD. You can come in for a fast track in which you're essentially submitting one application that has both the phase 1 component and the phase 2 component. You need quantitative milestones. if you get selected for the fast track, then at the end of that phase 1 period, you will have to demonstrate you met those milestones, and we would transition you to phase 2 without you having to reapply and go through peer review once again. Now, for companies that have significant data coming in the door, you can actually come in directly for that phase 2 stage. And we also are participants in the commercialization readiness pilot as well as the phase 2B. Both of them offer $3+ million in additional funding, and this is all per project. The key in terms of where do you fit, what's your budget limit, all of that, come talk to us. So in terms of the budget limits, they are total cost, which is different from any other NIH funding opportunities that have direct cost budget limits. You can include a 7% fee, and you can also include potentially fee-for-service activities as part of the small business cost, providing that it's commercially available and all analysis done by a small business, and it's a fee per basis. So you've likely heard about the different funding opportunities at the NIH and the different steps from application to award. All in all, it can take about 5 to 12 months, especially if a resubmission is needed, which is actually often the case at the NIH. So now I'd like to focus more on the NIA Office of Small Business Research, which is the office that I lead. We provide central coordination for the small business programs, as well as many of the training programs across the Institute. We provide guidance to applicants, outreach, just like the talk that I'm giving right now. Funding, in terms of seeding new funding opportunities, networking, facilitating connections between our awardees and potential partners, whether they be internal to the NIA or external. We also the funding stream for our companies, and then entrepreneurial training and other resources to help our portfolio companies maximize the chances that they can reach those key inflection points and move towards the market. So at NIA, we have 4 scientific divisions: the Division of Aging Biology, the Division of Behavioral and Social Research, the Division of Geriatrics and Clinical Gerontology, and the Division of Neuroscience. And our office coordinates the small business programs across all 4. In this slide, we showed the types of things that we're currently interested in and funding. AD and ADRD, as I mentioned, aging in place, age-related diseases, research tools, many of these other areas. This is not meant to be exhausting. Anything that can improve the lives and the health of older adults is something that we would like to be interested in. And the pie chart here, this is a snapshot in time, so it's not that we specifically, have funds for each of these areas to that exact percentage, but this gives you a rough idea of what our portfolio looks like at any given moment. So as I mentioned, Alzheimer's disease and related dementias is a current focus of the NIA and of the small business programs. You likely all know the need for new Alzheimer's disease approaches, whether it be therapeutics, preventive approaches, care management, diagnostics, etc. So here are the funding opportunities that we currently participate in. The omnibus funding opportunities, these are the investigator-initiated NIH-wide funding opportunities. And then, as I mentioned, we have AD, ADRD funding opportunities. And the ones listed here, PS 19-316 and 317, are really open-ended for Alzheimer's disease. So anything addressing Alzheimer's disease is likely to fall into those 2 solicitations. And then we list a couple of others here. As I mentioned, we also participate in a CRP, which is a great program, and I'll get into it in a couple of minutes. And then the administrative supplements promote diversity and the SBIR tech transfer FOA. So another thing I want to highlight for those of you that already have a phase 1 application or have recently had a phase 1 award, not application, but award from the NIH. The NIH recently rolled out a new TABA program. So what is TABA? TABA is it's legislative language that was in the last reauthorization that allows any small business applicant to request funds for technical and business assistance that goes beyond the aims of their project. So in phase one, they're allowed to request $6,500, but in phase two, they're actually allowed to request $50,000 and can really be useful to acquire consultants and other types of resources that can do things like help with product sales, with regulatory plans, reimbursement, IP protection, et cetera, et cetera. So you need to list that in or you should list that in your application. But for phase one, there is a program that the NIH just rolled out where instead of you asking for the money, because it is a very limited amount in your application, we've actually kind of pooled those resources and give you a lot more bang for your buck with a new report. And sorry, this is the old slide, so I need to update this. But the new report is a needs assessment report. No, that's correct. A needs assessment report where a contractor for the NIH will go through all the different technical and business areas and figure out where are your needs, what's known, what's not known, and how can you advance towards that phase two, and really help you develop the core of what will go into your commercialization plan, which is a required part of the phase two application. So the point here is that if you are a phase one awardee at the NIH, I strongly encourage you to look at the TABA program. You should have received emails recently. If not, ask your program officer. And I think it's something that you'll find extremely helpful. I mentioned the CRP. So this is for companies that have an ongoing or recent phase two. It's similar to a phase 2B, except that it doesn't have the same restrictions around what can be funded. So things that are outside research and development, like reimbursement and regulatory, that can be included in a CRP project. And it also doesn't have the restriction on the percentage of funds that can go to subcontractors. Understanding that for the CRP, much of the work would go to subcontractors. And this shows we have a small and a large one. And again, you have to have an existing phase two to apply for these programs. Again, for companies that are already awarded by us, first, we're always interested in more women-owned and socially and economically disadvantaged businesses. And then for companies already awarded by us, we encourage you to consider the Diversity Supplement Program, where we'll actually add funds to your award so that you can bring in, diverse investigators into your team and expand the project. An example of how we work with stakeholders is a collaboration with us and the ADDF, where the ADDF really rolled out a program that for those companies that get a phase one from us, they can actually go to the ADDF for potential bridge funding and additional funding at the end of their phase one to provide them funds to continue the research until they get to phase two. We have several resources at the NIH to help entrepreneurs, and I'll talk about some of these as we go forward. So first, for those that have not had an award from the NIH before, strongly recommend you consider and look up the NIH Applicant Assistance Program. This is a program for people that have not received NIH, SBIR, STTR awards. There are several institutes participating, and in fact, several more have joined recently. So there's more than just the ICs listed on this slide. It helps provide, kind of demystify that application process, provide support on the phase one's application process and coaching. So it is a competitive, we prioritize individuals that are small businesses that are owned and operated or led by women and underrepresented investigators. And this just shows you the timeline, the eligibility and process. And here's a link to the portal. In terms of entrepreneurial resources, one example is the C3I program, which is a 24-week entrepreneurial training course. Those that heard Ilana's talk earlier today likely heard about this program, which her institute is leading. Another great program is I-Specifically, so it's a life science focused version of I-Core. And this I-Core is a little different from the I-Core that you may normally think about, in that this is for companies that already have a phase one award. And exciting, we are just launching a new program at the NIH called READY, Research and Entrepreneurial Development Immersion. And there are going to be several funding opportunities. If you click on this link, it links you to the concept that was recently approved by the NIA Advisory Council for, considering funding opportunities around individual career development, small businesses, but really with the goal of incorporating more entrepreneurial training into our funding opportunities so that that next generation of researchers and the next generation of PhDs has the skills needed for a more varied set of career options. So more to come there. Additionally, we are just about to roll out the Entrepreneurial Workshop Series in collaboration with NHLBI. And this will be offered to portfolio companies. And then if there's room, we'd invite others to join. And I also want to highlight SEED, which is a new office within the NIH that was set up to really support the NIH innovator community and includes 3 teams: small business innovation, managing the SBIR programs across the NIH, academic innovation, and innovator support. And one example of innovator support specific now at the NIA is we now have an entrepreneur in residence, Don Rose, who actually is available to help all of our companies once they've been funding on business development type questions. So one thing SEED does in collaboration with the institutes such as ourselves is actually form agreements with industry conferences like many of the ones happening at JP Morgan, such as RESI as an example, in order to be able to showcase NIH companies that may now be ready to pitch to investors and facilitate that showcasing. And at the NIA, we list many of the companies that we're showcasing on our website, and we'll actually be having a showcase, a virtual conference, to showcase these companies to investors in collaboration with NINDS. So this is an event that we have coming up in February. So I'd now like to break and see if there's any general questions before I go into the last part of the talk in terms of tips for a successful application. Can TABA cover legal and/or financial statement reviews and audits? So that's a good question. I don't know off the top of my head. I don't want to give incorrect. It would likely depend on the specifics. So I would definitely suggest that you talk to us before you put in the TABA request, and we can get a more specific answer. I think in some cases it would, but it would depend on specifics. The beginning age range for our institutes, so there's no specific, I assume you mean in terms of what we consider older adults. There's no specific age range. We do support technologies that can help in that transition to becoming an older adult. So there's no specific age range, in terms of how we define an older adult. But we focus on things that really have a direct relation to aging, since there are so many other institutes. So for example, you can take a disease like cancer and say, oh, well, cancer occurs mostly in older adults, so I'll send my cancer projects to NIA. But rather, in that case, the National Cancer Institute will be the right home. And then do the pay lines differ between AD, ADRD grants and non-AD, ADRD grants? Great question. For the SBIR program, we don't publish actual pay lines, but we do have, funding ranges and things in terms of scores. And yes, there is a difference between AD, ADRD, and a general pool of applications and awards, because much of the funds that we have been given by Congress is specific to AD, ADRD. So that does result in. So I'll now move forward in terms of tips for applications. So when not to apply, I always tell people, it's SBIR, STTR is free money, as free as you could get, in terms of there's no dilution, there's no repayment. There is one cost, and that cost is time. So it does take time not only to get the award, but to write a competitive application. It is a government application and it is very in-depth. There are a lot of forms and a lot of instructions. So you really want to spend the time to put together that competitive application. You need to be able to show a true competitive advantage and value proposition It's not meant for basic research, and it's not meant to bridge the gap of a lost R1. So as you go and you think about getting started and you develop that first draft, consider the company's strengths, how to exploit them, the weaknesses, how you can address them. And I always tell people, for almost every project, as soon as you talk about that project to someone, 6 or 7 times out of 10, you'll get one key question. Make sure that you address that question in your application, because if you don't, you're likely going to get that question in review, and it can negatively affect your score. And contact us at least a month before the due date. We'd be happy to discuss your aims, talk about what we're currently most interested at the NIA and how it fits. So, I think it's really important that you do contact us. Getting support from external services and grant writers is actually very helpful, because we cannot go into, advising you on how to fill out each form or anything like that. So there are other resources for that, but we are the right people to advise you on kind of the science and the aims, and definitely encourage you to reach out to us. And then NIH Reporter is a great database to review similar currently funded NIH projects. And this is a link to NIH Reporter. So there are several sample applications from the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases on the website. We actually just added one application and its corresponding summary statement to the NIA website, and the link is here. And we will be adding additional applications over the coming months. So this is a great resource to look at applications that actually got a great score and were funded. I mentioned that there are a lot of instructions. Those instructions are covered in a 100+ page application guide, really an instrumental resource, as well as the NIH Assist platform in terms of understanding how to fill out the application. In the application package, one of the forms is called the PHS Assignment Request Form. And you can use that form to request specific study sections and or specific institutes. You can also request dual assignment between multiple institutes that might fit your project. And that's always a great idea if that exists. So probably the most important thing we can tell people is to start early, at least 2 months, if not more. If you've actually not received or not applied for NIH grants before at the company, I would say more than that, because you have to complete several administrative registrations that on their own can take at least 2 months. So you want to start that process very early. But in terms of writing the application, assemble that team, gain access to the right facilities, obtain letters of support, and I'm happy to answer questions on any of this. So in terms of how is an SBIR grant, as you think about writing that, how does that differ from an academic grant? The main difference is that the focus of the SBIR grant is the product, not the science. Now, the science is, of course, underpinning that product development and research, but it's the product that you're focusing on. And the review criteria are the same in title, but how they're interpreted are different. So a simple example is significance for an all-in-one type grant will be how much knowledge are you adding to the field? What is your chance of a landmark publication? So, but for SBIR, the peer reviewers will still be asked to review significance, but they'll be thinking about it more in terms of, what is the unmet need? Are you changing the paradigm? How strong is that value proposition? So it's still significance, but it's viewed in a different lens. And here are the list of those review criteria. So refining your vision, carefully consider the study design. And as I said, you're welcome to contact us. Building the right team. So really there's 2 areas of the application that tend to get the most concerns from reviewers and affect the scores. And they are the team and the approach. So for team, it's actually not usually the PI. So the PI is most often someone that has tremendous expertise and tremendous background. But what usually happens is reviewers will find other pieces that affect the project that maybe there's not that expertise. So simple example, if you are proposing animal studies and you don't have a biostatistician proposed in the project, you're likely to get a concern that you need someone to manage the statistics of the animal studies. Now that could have been solved by hiring a biostatistician as a consultant, and and depending on the nature of the project, could have been something like 5 hours or 10 hours over the course of your 1-year phase 1, but that would have had that specific expertise. So as you think about the application and you think about the budget and the team, think about that robust team and filling in all these, what might be small amounts of expertise that you need in terms of the overall picture, but you can fill that in with external partners. Doesn't mean that you have to hire a team of 30 people. In fact, most small businesses that we fund have teams of anywhere from 2 to 12 or so people. That's the majority of applications have something like that. I mentioned coming to us. What I recommend is that you actually send us the draft of the specific aims page. The specific aims page, it's one of the forms in the application, and it's actually a key score driving page of the SBIR and STTR applications. In that first half to 2/3 of that page, you want to convince the reviewers, why is this the project that should get the best score out of the thousands of applications of the NIH? And that includes really that elevator pitch, explaining what the technology prototype is, what that value proposition is and the competitive advantage, textual highlights of the preliminary data that will be shown in the rest of the application, and then the relevance to the mission of the institute you're applying for. And then the last third to half of the page will be the specific aims for the proposed project. You're welcome to send that to us at least a month before, and we would be happy to provide feedback. And I always remind people, make sure to focus. So we found that companies that try to apply for more than one application in a single receipt date most often end up not getting funded for any of their applications. So really it's important to focus per receipt date on what you think will be the best application and the most competitive application. And then that's the one that we'd be happy to advise you on. So drafting a clear application, and this is the research strategy section, and these lays out some of the different things that are required in the research strategy section. Key examples, potential pitfalls, and alternative angles of attack. If you don't include that, you're likely going to get a concern that will affect your score. So you want to make sure to include that. And as I said, approach is really the other area that the reviewers have a lot of concerns. So make sure you're justifying every experiment you're proposing, every animal or cellular model that you're proposing. Why is that the right model? Make sure that that's very clearly stated in your application. Otherwise, you will get concerns. Other components that are part of the application, letters of support. So anyone that is getting paid, that would be paid if your project gets funded, they need to do what you're saying they're going to do for the cost that you're saying they'll do it at. So those are necessary. However, what's most powerful is letters of support from people that are not going to have any financial incentive of your application getting funded. And this could be clinicians, potential end users, potential investors that can talk about, the need for your product or their interest in potentially providing follow-on funding if these initial aims are met. Those letters can really be very powerful in terms of review. For phase 2 applications, you need to have a commercialization plan, and this lists many of the other areas. So conducting your own peer review, if you think about your colleagues, you probably know, if you think about the 3 colleagues that could best help review your proposal and provide comments, you probably know that one that you best application in the world, they're going to pick through it and have a lot of concerns that they're going to raise. Do make sure that you send it to that colleague, because what's going to happen is you're going to send it to peer review and you're going to get 3 preliminary assigned reviewers. And one of those 3 is going to think just like that colleague. And they're going to be that person that's very critical. So as the more critical people that you can send it to before you apply, the better position you'll be in terms of review. If you weren't funded on the first try, so the reality is, if you look down to the second bullet, the majority of applicants to the NIH do need a resubmission to get funded. And in fact, the success rate, the funding rate of resubmissions is more than double that of first submissions. So you really want to, don't be discouraged. Once you get that summary statement with the concerns, what I recommend is you actually take those concerns in a resubmission. You have one extra page to address those concerns. Draft that one page, send that to your program officer, and then have a call with them ahead of the resubmission. And they can provide additional guidance if they think you've addressed all the concerns or what else they suggest you think about. So really, but to maximize that interaction, I do suggest having that draft first and thus asking them to review that for you. Very important to be constructive, not defensive, in terms of think about what will put you in the best position to get a better score. And as I said earlier, really remember to focus on one application per round to put yourself in the most competitive state. And again, feel free to connect with us. And I believe I have my colleague, Joy Tolliver, on the line, who's another person in the office that can help you along the way. So let me see. I don't see any additional questions in the chat right now. I went through that really fast, hopefully not too fast. But let me see if there are additional questions. Good. Well, I'm glad that you all found this helpful. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I didn't get to that I think is critical, but I think I touched on each of the overall pieces. So again, we're here for you as you think about questions in the future. And Michal, will the slides be shared by FreeMind?
Yeah, we'll post them on our YouTube channel in about a week.
Okay, great. And will they have access to like the actual slides with the links, or just the presentation?
To the presentation.
Okay, so if anyone needs like the actual links or stuff, just email our office and we will be able to send you the slide with the links so that you can access the different links. How are you viewing applications for digital therapeutics? So we are interested in digital therapeutics and digital health overall. I can tell you actually, if you look at that pie chart that I showed over time in terms of the percentage of awards that are in digital health, that's been a very rapidly growing percentage over the last few years. So it's something we're increasing our interest and comfort with, especially as more technology and approaches have been enhancing the validity and the potential of digital therapeutics, including things like AI and things of that sort. So definitely something of interest. Of course, it's specific. It depends on the specific application and approach. So we'd be happy to talk to you. But as a whole, that area is something that we've been increasingly interested in. Let me see, there was another question. How do you defend the low success rate of applications even on resubmission? Do you believe the system identifies the highest merit applications? A great question. So first, I mean, I'll say that I think the peer review system at the NIH is something that we can always enhance over time, and we are looking to enhance. I'm hopeful that in the next couple of years, you will see some changes in terms of peer review system and SBIR. It's something we've been working on and hope to allow sooner rather than later to really enhance peer review of SBIR applications. But I do think the current system really does a pretty good job of identifying meritorious applications. You know, in terms of the success rate, I guess it depends on kind of, you know, what your threshold is and where you come. The success rates of SBIR on average are on par, if not greater, than other NIH mechanisms. such as R1s and things of that sort, and are much higher than private funders in terms of small businesses. So I think, yes, we wish we could fund every small business applicant that comes in, but at the end of the day, there is a limit on the amount of funds that we have and the need to be able to, make sure that each project is significant. So there's always a balancing act, but I'd say that the success rates of 12% for first submissions and 26% for resubmissions, I think my personal view is relatively healthy and relevant to other NIH mechanisms. Any other questions? No, well, thank you very much. And I hope to talk to many of you in the future. Good luck.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Haim.
You're welcome. Thank you.